What is the truth? The truth is, the human trafficking industry is on the verge of major rapid growth within the next decade, and people everywhere deserve to know the truth of the global child supply market it operates right in our cities and neighborhoods. I'm Moses Farrow, trauma therapist, educator, and activist for children and their families victimized by this industry. Today, I wanted to read to you a piece I had written that was published in Severance Magazine back in December 2024, titled "The Illusion of Adoption is Over." The illusion of adoption is over. When people ask me about adoption, I tell them the truth. The best conversations start with what they know and believe about adoption. These days, people bring up the abandonment and loss issues, the human rights violations, or the moral dilemmas of how children are being taken from their parents and being given to others willing to pay for them. Many others also ask me what the solution is for children in need and for people who want to raise a family. It all starts with understanding what we mean by the word adoption as we believe it to be today. The focus of my work as an adoption trauma therapist and educator is to help people see the truth about adoption. There are three main issues I address in my trainings and presentations aimed at getting us all on the same page. Deprogramming. For years, I have written about connecting the right dots and framing our experiences and issues that come up repeatedly among those impacted by the adoption industry. At this point, there is no denying there is an industry that drives this process of adoption. Defined as the act or fact of legally taking another's child and bringing it up as one's own, adoption has been readily accepted as such around the world for generations. I admit I didn't question it until a few colleagues presented a different definition. Thanks to Arun Dole, Executive Director of Against Child Trafficking, and Janine Mungja and Jeanette Vance, aka the Vance Twins, who have authored and curated books, most notably Adoption Land, From Orphans to Activists, and Adoption, What You Should Know, I now ask people, what does legally taking mean? That's when the topic of the industry comes up. The issues of supply and demand, costs, policies that legalize the practices of taking children from their parents and families monopolize the conversation for the next hour. By the end, we are left scratching our heads. Are we even talking about adoption anymore? This is the process of deprogramming ourselves from the industry's propaganda that has effectively been brainwashing all of us while maintaining and growing a child supply market. The question remains, where are these children coming from? And perhaps more accurately, how are they being sourced? A key part of the deprogramming process is to be made aware of how the industry has conflated the act of taking children in questionably criminal ways and calling it a child welfare solution. Social justice advocates have been saying adoption is legalized child trafficking, and now there are a number of investigations, documentaries such as One Child Nation and Geographies of Kinship, and testimonies of victims that are providing such evidence of children and their mothers being trafficked through adoption. How can this be considered an acceptable child welfare solution? It presents a conundrum, a moral dilemma that needs immediate rectification and redress. To start, trafficking mothers and their children needs to stop and their rights protected. Child trafficking is not a child welfare solution. Victimization. The trauma of adoption has become widely understood as a traumatic loss. The mental health field has been on a trauma-informed movement for over a decade thanks to the ACEs study in 1997, and top professionals like Nadine Burke-Harris, Bessel van der Kolk, and Gabor Mate, among others. Worth noting, too, are Robin Goebel and Paul Sutherland, who has helped bring attention to the layers of attachment trauma experienced in adoption. Today, people more readily acknowledge the trauma of relinquishment, abandonment, being given up for adoption, and the way it shows up as complex PTSD. However, there are victims still pushing for the truth of what has happened to them. What they find goes beyond the concerns of attachment trauma and being wrongfully pathologized. The truth is that the trauma comes from being victimized, dehumanized, and commodified by this industry. The trauma is intergenerational, systemic, and globalized. From a neurodevelopmental perspective, victims don't have a pre-trauma state to fall back on. The industry targets and recruits women and mothers. They are coerced, stigmatized, and exploited. In essence, they are trafficked. The violence and abuse, moral or otherwise, in such innocuous statements as adoption is an option, causes stress and trauma that gets passed along during pregnancy at the critical stages of the child's brain development. Such statements and practices of grooming and brainwashing have been in place for centuries. Women are now growing up in the globalized culture of coercion. Where can they turn to if the whole world is in on the scheme? Organizations like Saving Our Sisters support preserving families and educating women. Restoration. Restoration, not reunification. Preservation, not separation. As I have learned from anti-trafficking organizations, restoration is the goal. A wraparound approach is implemented when victims are identified and their traffickers are brought to justice. Services, resources, and systems of care are provided to restore the victim back to their life before they were trafficked. It's known among anti-trafficking professionals that the majority of victims don't realize what happened to them until it's been identified. In fact, many victims want to remain with their traffickers, especially when they are well cared for. Because everyone understands it is trafficking, a known crime, family, friends, and loved ones of the victims are desperate to find them and bring them home. This is a process of restoration and not reunification. However, the adoption industry has so effectively blurred and conflated these issues that many reunifications fail in adoption, leaving it up to debate whether reunification should happen at all. Victims of the adoption industry share the desire to stay with the people who bought them, often referred to as Stockholm Syndrome, bringing up the gratitude for saving them. As adoptees, victims, and commodities, seeking the truth of what happened to us must be the priority. Identifying the problem is the necessary first step in deprogramming ourselves from the industry's propaganda. Having gone through this process myself, I no longer go along with this illusion of adoption that has the whole world believing it's child welfare while the industry has built a multi-billion-dollar trafficking scheme. Human trafficking is a crime. What is often lost and rarely mentioned in such conversation is the fact that this industry has been responsible for thousands, if not tens of thousands, of deaths, suicides, and murders of mothers and their children. The industry has left a legacy of genocides and war crimes. These are crimes against humanity that go far beyond the issues of loss, abandonment, and relinquishment. We must not allow this legacy to continue. War is war. Death is death. Crime is not care. Trafficking is not welfare. This illusion of adoption is over.